In 2004, a 7-year-old girl playing at her neighborhood playground in Ohio vanished without a trace. Police suggested she may have wandered off or been taken by someone she knew. But there were no footprints, no witnesses, and not a single shred of evidence to back the theory. For 3 long years, her family clung to hope, searching the woods and handing out flyers. Then, one quiet autumn afternoon, a dog digging in a field unearthed something that made the parents' blood run cold. A child's pink sneakers still tied to a bone-white fragment of human remains. The air was warm but heavy, the kind of late summer dusk where the light clings stubbornly to the horizon as if it refuses to surrender to night. In a small Ohio town, the hum of cicadas blended with the faint creak of swings drifting in the breeze. Children's laughter echoed across the modest playground, sharp, fleeting bursts that rose and fell like waves. But among those sounds was one voice, brighter than the rest, belonging to a 7-year-old girl whose boundless energy made her the heartbeat of the neighborhood. And in less than an hour, that voice would vanish into silence. She was small, with hair that never stayed in its braids for long, and a smile that seemed permanently tilted with mischief. Her parents described her as curious but careful, someone who would collect pebbles like treasure, yet always returned to her mother's side to show them off. On this evening, she begged for just a few more minutes at the playground. 5 more, Mom, please. Her mother, tired but softened by the child's pleading eyes, sighed and nodded. 5 minutes, she said firmly, crouching to adjust the girl's untied shoelace. Then we're heading home. Your dad's waiting. Promise. The girl chirped, darting away, sneakers slapping against the pavement as she bounded toward the slide. Her mother watched her weave between the other children, the fading sun catching in her hair, until the phone buzzed in her pocket. Just a quick glance, she thought. A message from her sister. When she looked up again, the girl was at the swings. The chain squealed as she kicked higher, legs cutting through the air with reckless joy. Her mother smiled, slipping the phone back into her bag. Minutes passed. The shadows grew longer. The playground slowly emptying as parents called their children in for dinner. A father whistled for his son. A little girl was dragged away mid-tantrum. The once lively air began to thin, leaving behind only the quiet scrape of gravel under sneakers and the hollow sound of swings moving on their own. Then, stillness. Her mother looked up again. The swing her daughter had been on was vacant, swaying gently as though someone had just jumped off. She scanned the climbing frame, the slide, the sandbox. No, sweetheart, she called, the word cutting sharply through the silence. No answer. The playground was nearly empty. A boy zipped up his jacket and left with his father. The cicadas droned louder, filling the void. Her pulse quickened. She walked the perimeter, eyes darting under the slide, behind the benches, around the swing set. Nothing. Panic set in like a cold tide creeping across her chest. Her voice cracked as she screamed her daughter's name into the dusk. Where are you? The silence that answered was suffocating. In those minutes, each second stretched into eternity. Her shoes pounded the gravel as she searched every corner, every shadow, calling again and again, her throat raw. Other parents joined in, scanning the field, the tray line, the parking lot. But the child who had just been there, laughing and flying through the air on the swings, was gone, swallowed by a place so ordinary, so safe, it seemed impossible. And as the last of the daylight slipped away, the only thing left was the sound of her mother's voice echoing across the playground, unanswered. The sirens cut through the quiet night like a blade, their red and blue strobes splintering across the playground's empty swings. Parents huddled together at the edge of the field, whispering in clipped, anxious voices, while the missing girl's mother clutched her husband's arm so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Officers moved with rigid urgency, setting up a perimeter, their radios crackling with short bursts of clipped commands. A child had vanished, snatched not from a highway, not from a crowded city street, but from a quiet neighborhood park. At first, the police worked under the simplest theory: she must have wandered. Children drift away from watchful eyes every day. Maybe she had chased a firefly into the trees. Maybe she was hiding in a game. She's small, probably curled up somewhere close. one officer reassured the parents, though his voice wavered on the last word. The mother shook her head violently. "No, she wouldn't leave me. She doesn't go far," she insisted, her voice raw. "She was just there, on the swings. She wouldn't just walk away." The officers exchanged uneasy glances, but the father spoke next, his tone trembling between desperation and command. "Then widen your search. Don't waste time. She didn't wander off. She's..." By midnight, the quiet town had transformed. Dozens of volunteers poured in with flashlights, the beams cutting through trees like jittery fireflies. The woods bordering the playground came alive with shouts, men and women calling her name into the dark, their voices echoing back hollowly. Dogs strained at their leashes, muzzles low to the ground, nostrils flaring as handlers urged them forward. From above, the drone of a helicopter's rotors reverberated through the night, spotlight carving pale arcs over fields and treetops. The air smelled of damp earth and gasoline, a humid heaviness that clung to every searcher's clothes. Leaves rustled, as if something or someone moved just beyond reach, only for the sound to dissolve into the stillness of the woods. Her mother moved among the officers, face streaked with tears, grabbing sleeves, begging them to check further out, to knock on every door. "She's out there," she repeated again and again, like a prayer or a curse. One deputy tried to calm her. "Ma'am, we're doing everything we can." "It's not enough," she screamed, voice breaking. "She's 7 years old. Every second matters." The line of flashlights pressed deeper into the dark timber, branches snapping under boots, the distant bark of dogs punctuating the night. Volunteers returned with scraps of clothing, candy wrappers, broken toys, none belonging to her. Each false lead hollowed the family further. By 3 a.m., exhaustion weighed heavy on the searchers. Faces shone with sweat despite the cooling night, hands scraped by brambles, throats raw from shouting. Still, no sign of the girl. No footprints in the mud. No trail in the leaves. Nothing. It was as though the earth had swallowed her whole. As the first faint streaks of dawn bled into the horizon, painting the sky with gray and muted orange, the search party emerged from the woods. Eyes downcast, movements slowed, they gathered near the playground. The swing she had left behind was still moving faintly, as if mocking their failure. Her mother collapsed into her husband's chest, sobbing, while the officers exchanged grim looks over her shoulder. And then came the words no parent wants to hear, spoken low but certain by the lead officer. "We've searched all night, and there's nothing." The sun crested the horizon, spilling pale light over the tired faces of an entire town. But it only revealed what they already feared. The child was gone, and the earth had offered no answers. The silence that followed the search was unbearable, as though the world itself had paused in mourning. Yet to understand the weight of her absence, one first had to understand who she was, the girl behind the missing posters, the smiling face frozen in photographs. She was 7 years old, a child who carried sunlight with her even on the darkest mornings. At school, she was the first to volunteer to read aloud, though she stumbled over longer words, giggling at her own mistakes. Her laughter was infectious, a small, sharp melody that filled the classroom and softened even the sternest of teachers. She loved stories, one teacher recalled, her voice breaking as she spoke to reporters weeks later. Fairy tales, especially. She'd raise her hand and ask, "But what happens after the happy ending? Do they stay happy forever?" That was just her, always curious, always wondering. Her desk had been decorated with stickers, tiny rainbows, hearts, and one lopsided star. A friend from her class remembered how she'd trade lunch snacks, not for candy, but for pencils with sparkly erasers. She said she was collecting them. The little girl explained, clutching one of those erasers tightly in her hand. She said they were her lucky charms. At home, she was a daughter who still crawled into her parents' bed after nightmares, whispering in the dark that she dreamt of getting lost in the woods. Her mother stroked her hair on those nights, whispering back that she would never let her go. Her father remembered the afternoons spent in their backyard. She would pick dandelions and present them like bouquets, insisting he put them in a vase, no matter how quickly they wilted. "For you, Daddy," she'd say, her face glowing with pride. He'd laugh and pretend they were roses, but deep down he kept each one pressed inside a book, Even then, he must have known how fleeting those small gifts of childhood were. Her favorite bedtime story was about explorers, children venturing into forests and caves, discovering hidden worlds. But she would stop her mother halfway through and ask, "Would you come find me if I got lost?" Her mother always answered without hesitation, "Of course, I'd never stop looking." That promise had now become a cruel prophecy. The family described her dreams with reverence, as if speaking them aloud might keep them alive. She wanted to be a veterinarian, to save animals, especially strays. Their dog had been her shadow, following her from room to room, curling beside her bed each night. Her innocence was threaded into the smallest details, the way she always wore mismatched socks, claiming it made her run faster, the way she sang to herself quietly when she thought no one was listening, the way she would pause at puddles not to avoid them, but to study her reflection rippling in the water. In the wake of her vanishing, the house felt like a museum of her life. Crayons scattered on the living room rug, a doll propped on the couch mid-game, her tiny shoes left by the door, untied as always. Each object a reminder of how abruptly the world had shifted from presence to absence. Her father's voice, usually steady, trembled as he spoke to neighbors in the days that followed. "She's not gone," he said. "Not really. She's out there waiting, and I'll find her. I don't care how long it takes, I'll never stop searching." It was a vow spoken not in hope, but in defiance, a father's desperate battle against the void that had swallowed his child. The longer the girl remained missing, the heavier the silence around the playground grew. What had once been a cheerful gathering place now felt tainted, every creak of the swings echoing like a reminder of what had been stolen. The police, standing before an anxious community, began to outline theories, each one more fragile than the last. "Maybe she ran away," one detective suggested during the earliest press briefing. His voice carried little conviction. The words rippled through the room, met with instant backlash. Her mother shot up from her chair, eyes burning. "She's 7 years old," she snapped. "She doesn't even cross the street without holding my hand. Where would she run to?" The father leaned forward, fists clenched against his knees. His voice was quieter, but no less sharp.
"You're wasting time."
"She didn't run. Someone took her." Detectives scribbled notes, but behind their pens lay uncertainty. Stranger abduction was rare, almost unheard of in their town, yet no other explanation fit. In the station, debates grew heated. Detective Harris, a veteran with 30 years of service, paced before the evidence board, tapping the eraser of his pencil against a single photograph of the girl's smiling face. "Runaways leave traces, bags packed, notes left behind." "We've got none of that." His younger partner, Detective Lane, countered, "Abductions leave traces too. Struggle marks, witnesses, vehicle tracks. We've got nothing of that either." The room fell silent. The nothingness itself was the most unnerving detail. Meanwhile, the community unraveled under the weight of fear. Parents who once let their children roam free now kept them tethered by the hand, eyes darting to every stranger who lingered too long. Playgrounds emptied. The laughter of children was replaced by uneasy whispers. At the grocery store, neighbors exchanged rumors in hushed tones. "I heard someone saw a van parked near the park." Another voice chimed in. "Didn't the Smith boy say he saw a man watching from the trees?" Each tale fed the wildfire of paranoia, though none could be verified. The playground itself became a crime scene frozen in time. Yellow tape fluttered in the breeze. A lone swing swayed, unclaimed, as if haunted. Mothers glanced at it while clutching their children closer, muttering prayers under their breath. Detectives began combing through the neighborhood, knocking on doors, asking the same questions again and again. "Did you see anyone unusual that evening? Any cars you didn't recognize?" Most shook their heads, but eyes betrayed unease because the truth was more terrifying than any theory. The girl had vanished under their very noses, and no one had seen a thing. Then came the first name. A neighbor, a man who lived 2 houses down, had been spotted outside near dusk. Known for keeping to himself, he rarely spoke to others. A few whispered that he gave them a bad feeling. Detectives called him in for questioning. Under the harsh fluorescent lights of the interrogation room, the man sat stiffly, hands folded in his lap. Harris leaned across the table. "You were near the park that night." "Why?" The neighbor licked his lips. "I smoke outside, that's all. I saw nothing." "Nothing?" Lane pressed. "Not a little girl on the swings? Not her mother calling out?" He shook his head, gaze fixed on the table. "I mind my business." Outside the glass, other officers watched, tension heavy in the air. Could this be their suspect? The parents clung to hope that at last they were closing in. But hours of questioning yielded no crack. No slip of the tongue, no evidence. His alibi held. He had been on the phone with his sister that evening, records confirmed. By the time he walked free, escorted out the back to avoid angry neighbors waiting at the front, suspicion had already spread like a stain. To the town, he was guilty by proximity. To the detectives, he remained an unsettling shadow. A reminder that even if innocence was proven, fear left its mark. Back in their empty house, the parents sat in their daughter's room, staring at the toys neatly arranged on her shelf. Her father whispered into the quiet, voice hoarse from grief and anger. "They're chasing the wrong people," he muttered. "Someone out there knows what happened, and I'll find out who." The lamp by her bed flickered in the silence, casting long shadows across the walls decorated with rainbows and stars. And in the house 2 doors down, a neighbor pulled his curtains tight, knowing that though the police had let him go, the community never would. The woods behind the playground loomed like a dark ocean, their branches tangled together in a canopy that seemed to swallow light. By day they were a place of exploration. Children played hide and seek, hunters walked their trails, families gathered firewood. But at night, those same woods turned into a labyrinth of shadows, the perfect place for something or someone to vanish without a trace. On the second night of the search, officers pushed deeper into the tree line, joined by volunteers in reflective vests. Their flashlights bobbed like will-o'-the-wisps, beams slicing through mist that clung low to the ground. Every sound was amplified: the snap of twigs, the rustle of leaves, the panting of dogs straining at their leashes. "She couldn't have gotten far," one searcher murmured, as if to convince himself. His breath fogged in the cooling air. Another answered, "If she's in here, we'll find her." Kids don't just disappear, but their words hung hollow against the pressing silence. They fanned out in grid patterns, calling her name, their voices growing hoarse. Dogs stopped suddenly, sniffing furiously at the earth. Handlers crouched low, brushing leaves aside. A small indentation appeared in the mud. A shoe print. Hearts leapt. "Mark it," shouted a deputy. But when they compared its size, it was too large. An adult's, likely one of the volunteers. Hope evaporated as quickly as it had flared. Deeper still, they reached an old barn at the edge of the property line. Its doors sagged on rusted hinges, paint peeled to gray. Inside, dust motes floated in flashlight beams. The air reeked of mildew and rot. Searchers whispered uneasily, every creak of the floorboards magnified. One officer leaned down and lifted a child's mitten from beneath a pile of hay. The parents were called in, trembling as they held the tiny fabric in their hands, but it wasn't hers. Another false lead. Another stab of grief. Hours stretched into dawn. Exhaustion gnawed at the searchers. Brambles tore at their clothes and skin, leaving thin lines of blood. One volunteer swore he heard a faint cry in the distance. They rushed toward the sound, hearts pounding, only to find an owl lifting from a branch, its wings whispering into the air. The disappointment hit like a physical blow. Still, they pressed forward. The father joined them, ignoring officers' pleas to rest. His flashlight shook in his grip, his voice raw from shouting, "Sweetheart, answer me." The words dissolved into the night, swallowed by trees that seemed endless. His wife, standing at the tray line, begged him to stop before he collapsed, but he shook her off. "I won't stop," he muttered. "Not while she's out here." By dawn, the search party stumbled back toward the playground, their clothes damp with dew, boots caked in mud, eyes rimmed with fatigue. They gathered beneath the thinning gray sky. No new evidence, no trail to follow. Yet one detail lingered. A deputy reported seeing something strange in the woods. A shape moving between the trees, too far for his flashlight to catch. Might have been a deer, he admitted, but when pressed, his voice faltered. Or maybe not. The others dismissed it as exhaustion playing tricks, but as he walked back to his cruiser, he couldn't shake the image. The fleeting impression of a figure pausing just beyond the beam of his light, watching before slipping silently deeper into the forest. Grief is supposed to dull with time, but for her parents it sharpened, like a blade turned again and again against stone. Weeks passed, then months, yet the absence of their daughter was louder than any sound. The house became a hollow stage, her toys frozen mid-play, her drawings still taped to the refrigerator, her bed neatly made as if she might walk back through the door at any moment. Her mother refused to let the routine die. Every morning she poured a glass of orange juice for her daughter, setting it at the table before the seat remained empty. Every night she walked into her child's room, smoothed the blanket across the small bed, and whispered good night into the silence. "She's coming home," she told herself. "I have to be ready." Her father fought his grief in motion. He plastered her face across flyers, stapling them to telephone poles, tacking them to gas station windows, handing them out in grocery store aisles. He drove across county lines, pinning posters to boards in towns where no one had ever heard her name. When exhaustion threatened to break him, he reminded himself of his vow, "I will never stop searching." Their phone became both lifeline and torment. The tip line rang day and night. Sometimes it was strangers claiming to have seen her, a girl who matched the description at a rest stop or in the back seat of a passing car. Other times it was cruel pranksters disguising their voices to offer false hope. The mother answered every call, her hands shaking as she gripped the receiver. Where, when, what did she look like? Her eyes would widen, her face alight with desperate hope, only to crumple minutes later when officers traced the lead to nothing. She'd sink to the floor, whispering, "Why would they do this? Why would someone be so cruel?" Her husband would gather her into his arms, but even as he comforted her, his own eyes burned with fury. "Because they don't understand," he said through clenched teeth. "Because they don't know what it feels like to lose everything." The seasons turned. Snow fell, coating the playground where she had last been seen. Neighbors strung lights for Christmas, but the family's house remained dark, curtains drawn tight. Her mother couldn't bear the sight of decorations without her child there to marvel at them. By spring, the couple's marriage bent under the strain. Arguments erupted in the dead of night. She accused him of chasing hopeless leads, of wasting money on gas and posters. He accused her of giving up. Each fight ended the same way, both collapsing into silence, realizing that grief was the only thing holding them together. Yet still, they endured. A year passed. Then, too, the search parties dwindled. The media moved on. The town tried to return to normal. Parents once again brought their children to the playground, though some avoided the swing set where the girl had last been seen. But for her parents, life had no normal to return to. Her mother clung to rituals, lighting a candle in the window every night, arranging flowers by her photograph, whispering prayers into the dark. Her father clung to movement, organizing marches, begging for airtime on local news, visiting every police station that would still listen. "She's not a file to be closed," he told one detective, slamming his fist on the desk. "She's my daughter, and she's out." The detective sighed, weary from years of dead ends. "Mister, I know you want answers, but sometimes, the trail just goes cold." His eyes burned. "Not for me, not ever." By the third year, hope had thinned, but never broken. Then, on an ordinary afternoon in autumn, the phone rang again. This time, it wasn't a tip-line prank or a distant rumor, it was the sheriff himself. "A farmer's dog unearthed something in the field," he said, his tone heavy. "We need you to come in." Her father's hand tightened around the receiver, his knuckles white. For 3 years he had chased every rumor, every lead, every false dawn, and now, at last, something had been found. But as he hung up the phone, a chill spread through him. This discovery wasn't hope, it was dread. It began on an unremarkable afternoon. Cool air, leaves burning orange and gold across the Ohio countryside. A farmer walked his property, the fields stretching endlessly around him. the silence broken only by the steady crunch of his boots. His dog trotted ahead, nose to the ground, darting between stalks of brittle corn. Then the dog froze. At first the farmer thought it had caught the scent of a rabbit or groundhog, but instead of chasing, the animal began to dig furiously, paws tearing at the earth, soil spraying behind it in frantic bursts. The farmer frowned, walking closer. "Hey, what'd you find there?" he called, expecting to drag the dog away from some half-buried carcass. But as he leaned down, the sunlight caught on something pale emerging from the dirt. A small, fragile curve of white bone. Beside it, tangled in the roots and soil, was a sneaker, tiny, pink, the laces still tied. The farmer staggered back, his stomach lurching. His voice shook as he pulled out his phone. "Sheriff, you'd better get out here. Now." Within the hour, sirens pierced the still air, their wails carrying across the farmland. Deputies roped off the area, their boots sinking into soft earth as they worked. The discovery lay in a shallow depression where the dog had clawed the ground wide enough to reveal fragments of what appeared to be human remains. Officers moved with grim efficiency, marking the soil, photographing every angle. One bent to lift the shoe carefully, holding it in gloved hands. It was scuffed, stained, but unmistakably a child. The sheriff exhaled slowly. "Call the parents." At the station, the girl's mother sat rigid in her chair, staring at the floor as though bracing for a blow. Her husband paced the room, his fists clenched so tightly that his nails dug crescent moons into his palms. The sheriff entered quietly, removing his hat. His voice was low, deliberate. "We've recovered remains in a field south of town." Alongside a child's shoe, the mother shook her head violently. "No, no, it's not her." Her husband pressed forward, his voice sharp, desperate. "What proof do you have? It could be anyone." The sheriff held the shoe out on the table. "We need you to look." Her mother's scream shattered the air. Forensic teams descended on the site. Under careful excavation, more bone fragments were found, scattered shallowly as if the earth itself had struggled to keep them hidden. The remains were small, fragile, consistent with a child. Detectives whispered among themselves. The condition of the burial was sloppy, hasty. Whoever had left her here hadn't taken the time to dig deep, hadn't expected her to ever be found. The father stood at the field's edge that evening, rain beginning to fall in thin, cold streaks. He watched officers carry evidence bags to waiting vehicles, his eyes fixed on the earth as though it might still yield answers. His voice was quiet, more to himself than anyone else. "She was here, all this time, and none of us knew." In the weeks that followed, DNA tests confirmed what the shoe had already told them. The remains were hers. The missing girl from the playground had finally been found. But the discovery brought no peace, only new questions. How had she ended up here, miles from the place she vanished? Why had her body been left in such a shallow grave? And most haunting of all, who had put her there? The town that had once prayed for her safe return now found itself staring into the abyss of a darker truth. Parents pulled their children close. Neighbors looked at each other with suspicion. The fields, once ordinary stretches of farmland, became hallowed ground, soil that had concealed a secret for 3 long years. And for her parents, the agony only deepened. Hope was gone, replaced by the cold weight of certainty. Their daughter had not wandered. She had not run away. Someone had taken her, silenced her, and buried her like refuse in the dirt. The mother collapsed into her husband's arms the night the confirmation came. Through sobs, she choked out a single unanswerable question.
"Why her?"
He held her close, his jaw tight, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "We'll find out. Whoever did this, they'll pay." But even as he made the vow, detectives quietly admitted among themselves, the trail was colder than ever, and the person responsible might already be watching, hidden in plain sight. The discovery of the remains did not close the case. It blew it wide open. For 3 years, investigators had followed fading trails, their evidence boards collecting dust. Now the bones pulled from the shallow grave forced them back into motion, back into the nightmare. The sheriff called his team into the briefing room, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly above their bowed heads. On the table lay photographs of the field, the disturbed soil, the sneakers stained with dirt, the pale fragments of bone. The air was heavy with the smell of burnt coffee and the unspoken knowledge that this was no longer a missing person case. It was homicide. Detective Harris broke the silence first. His voice was gravel, worn by years of cases but edged with urgency. 3 years in the ground. Whoever did this thought it would never be found. They were wrong. And now, we find them. Forensic experts began their careful examination. Every piece of bone was catalogued, measured, studied under the harsh glow of lab lights. The pathologist, Dr. Keller, spoke softly, as though the child could still hear her. The fractures on these ribs, they suggest trauma, not decay. Her gloved hand hovered over the fragile remains. Something violent happened before she was placed here. Other details emerged. Insect activity indicated the body had been moved, possibly left above ground for some time before burial. Fibers clung to the soil, threads that did not match the clothing she had been wearing the day she vanished. To the detectives, it painted a disturbing picture. She had been taken elsewhere, held, then discarded in haste. The parents sat across from the investigators when these findings were delivered. The mother covered her mouth, eyes wet. The father's voice broke the silence, low and trembling with rage. So all this time she was alive, after the playground. Dr. Keller hesitated, careful with her words. We can't determine exactly how long, but the evidence suggests she didn't die the same day she disappeared. The room seemed to tilt, the weight of that truth pressing down on everyone. Theories reignited, each more haunting than the last. Detectives revisited the old suspects, knocking on doors that had long since closed. First was the solitary neighbor, the man 2 doors down who had once been interrogated under suspicion. He opened his door slowly, the shadow of years of whispers etched across his face. I told you before, he said bitterly. I don't know anything. But the detectives pressed harder this time. She didn't just disappear, Lane insisted, leaning forward. Someone buried her. Right here, in our town. If you know something, anything, now's the time. Next, they turned their gaze to a drifter who had passed through town that summer, a man with a record of petty crimes and unsettling behavior. Witnesses recalled seeing him near the playground days before she vanished. But when tracked down in another county, he offered a different alibi. I was in Columbus that week. Ask anyone at the shelter. Investigators checked. He was telling the truth. Another dead end. The town, once lulled into uneasy quiet, found itself gripped again by fear. Parents pulled their children indoors at the first sign of dusk. Doors that once stayed unlocked now clicked shut, and whispers spread like fire. If the girl had been kept alive for days, maybe weeks, then someone in their midst had done it. At the grocery store, neighbors eyed each other with suspicion. Could be anyone. One woman whispered, her hand trembling as she tucked bread into her basket. Even someone we thought we knew. But in the lab, the bones themselves whispered a different story. A faint residue on the shoe's sole suggested she had been in a basement or cellar, traces of mold spores not found in open air. Fibers caught in the laces were synthetic, matching industrial carpet. The sheriff laid these findings before his team late one night, the rain hammering against the windows. This wasn't random, he said firmly. Someone had a place to keep her. Someone close, and we're going to find them. The parents left the station in silence that night, the rain plastering their clothes to their skin. At the car, the mother finally spoke, her voice brittle. She was alone, afraid, and we weren't there. Her husband took her hand, his jaw trembling. But we're here now, and whoever did this, they're still out there. He looked back toward the glow of the station, where detectives pored over files, where photographs of their daughter stared down from the wall. The search was no longer about finding her alive. It was about something darker, uncovering the face of the person who had buried their child in the earth and walked away. The discovery of the remains sent ripples of fear through the community, but within the walls of the police station, it did something else. It reignited obsession. Investigators now had evidence, however fractured, and with it came a grim determination. Someone had kept this child. Someone had buried her. And someone still walked free. Detective Harris sat in the dim interrogation room, the hum of the fluorescent light above casting a pale glow over the table. Across from him was the neighbor, the same man who had been questioned 3 years earlier. His face was worn, eyes bloodshot, as if the weight of suspicion had never left him. "You told us you were outside that night," Harris said, voice steady, deliberate. "Said you saw nothing, but now we know she didn't die that day. Which means she was somewhere. Where was she?" The neighbor shifted, his jaw tight. "I told you before, I don't know anything. You people have ruined my life. Everyone in town thinks I'm a monster. I can't walk down the street without whispers." Lane leaned forward, his tone cutting sharper than Harris's. "Maybe the whispers are true. Maybe you've been hiding something." The neighbor slammed his hands on the table, the sound echoing through the room. "I didn't touch that girl." His voice cracked, more desperation than defiance. But behind the mirror, the observing officers exchanged skeptical glances. They had no proof, only suspicion. Once again, after hours of interrogation, he left without charges, his guilt unproven, but his shadow darker than ever. The case turned toward another lead, a man who had once worked at a construction site near the field where the remains were found. He had a criminal history, nothing violent but enough to draw attention. Pulled into questioning, he slouched in the chair, smirking. "So you think I buried some kid?" he sneered, leaning back. "You think I'm that stupid?" Lane's voice cut through the smirk. "We found synthetic carpet fibers with her. You worked in warehouses. You had access. Tell me why that doesn't look bad for you." The man chuckled, but his laugh rang hollow. "You're reaching. You've got nothing." But then, an unexpected turn. Hours into questioning, he leaned forward, voice dropping low. "Fine, I'll tell you. I did." Harris froze. "What did you say?" "I took her," the man whispered, his eyes fixed on the table. "She was walking near the park. I grabbed her. I kept her in a basement. Then I buried her when she died." The room chilled. For a moment, it seemed the nightmare was over, that at last they had their culprit, but the details that followed unraveled his confession. He described the wrong clothes, the wrong day, the wrong sequence of events. His story crumbled under the weight of facts. "Why would you lie about this?" Lane demanded, voice rising. The man smirked again, eyes glinting with something unhinged. "Because it makes you listen to me. Because it scares you." The detectives left the room seething, the hollow confession leaving a deeper scar. They had wasted precious hours, tangled in the lies of a man who craved attention more than truth. Meanwhile, the town's fear morphed into paranoia. Mothers whispered that the killer might be someone respected, someone they trusted. The pastor, the mailman, the teacher. Rumors spun webs through every street, and with them came suspicion that ate away at the fragile bonds of community. At night, the father sat awake at the kitchen table, staring at the glow of a single lamp. "Somebody here knows," he muttered to himself. His wife, standing in the doorway, asked softly, "And what if it's someone we've spoken to? Someone we've smiled at?" He looked up, eyes hard. "Then they've been laughing in our faces this whole time." The investigators pulled phone records, employment logs, even questioned old classmates of neighbors. Each lead cracked open new secrets. An affair hidden, a theft covered up, grudges festering in silence, but none tied directly to the girl. The investigation, instead of narrowing, fanned outward like a wildfire, consuming everyone in its path. Detective Harris confided to Lane one night as they stood smoking outside the station. "This town's rotten. Dig deep enough and everyone's got something to hide. But none of it tells us who buried her." Lane flicked his cigarette into the dark. "Then we keep digging. Secrets don't stay buried forever." As fall deepened, the case files grew heavier, stacked thick with interviews, false confessions, and rumors. Each day ended with more questions than answers. And always, on the wall of the briefing room, her photograph stared back. The same bright smile, the same trusting eyes, the same silent question. "Why me?" One night, long after the rest of the station had gone quiet, Harris sat alone at the evidence board. He stared at the map, the pins, the photographs, tracing connections with tired eyes. His pen hovered above the field where her remains had been found. Something about the burial nagged at him. Too shallow, too careless. Whoever did this hadn't been a seasoned predator. They had been desperate, reckless, someone local, someone who knew the woods, but panicked when it came time to hide what they had done. He leaned back, the chair creaking in the silence. "We're looking too far," he whispered to himself. "The answer's been right here all along." But as the hours ticked past and the building emptied to stillness, one fact remained unchanged. Whoever had stolen the little girl's life was still free. And the town, drowning in suspicion, was no closer to knowing which of them harbored the darkest secret of all. The detectives thought they had momentum. They had suspects, confessions, even if false, and a renewed fire beneath the case. But when the forensic reports began arriving in thick manila envelopes, that fire sputtered under the weight of contradictions. The first blow landed with the carpet fibers. Initial analysis suggested industrial material, the kind found in warehouses and office basements. But under more sophisticated testing, the fibers told a different story. They weren't industrial at all. They were from a common brand of household carpet, sold in hardware stores across the state. Tens of thousands of homes could have matched. What had once felt like a breadcrumb trail dissolved into dust. Detective Lane slammed the report on the desk, his frustration echoing down the hall. "We wasted weeks chasing that lead. Weeks." His partner, Harris, pinched the bridge of his nose, the lines of exhaustion carved deeper across his face. "That's how this works. One false step, and you're back at the start." Then came the timeline. The medical examiner's initial suggestion that the girl might have lived beyond the day she disappeared was overturned by conflicting analysis. Some bone evidence suggested rapid decomposition, consistent with a summer burial. Other data hinted at a delay, that she could have been moved before being placed in the field. Dr. Keller, the pathologist, stood before the detectives in the lab, her gloved hands hovering over a tray of fragile remains. "The truth is," she admitted softly, "I can't be certain. The damage, the weathering, it obscures the timeline. She may have been alive longer than we thought, or she may not have. The evidence simply doesn't fit together cleanly." Her words landed like stones. Uncertainty was worse than answers, worse than even the ugliest truth. The parents were summoned to the station, once again forced to sit through the painful ritual of listening to half-truths and scientific hesitation. The mother's hands trembled as she held a tissue, her voice barely above a whisper. "So what are you telling me? That she was taken, that she was buried, but you don't even know when. You don't even know how." The father's face was stone, but his voice shook with fury. "You're supposed to be the experts, and you're telling us nothing fits. Nothing makes sense." The sheriff, seated across from them, tried to explain. "We're not giving up, but the evidence we have, it's fragmented. Every time we think we've got something concrete, it cracks apart." The father leaned forward, his voice low, dangerous. "Then you're looking at it the wrong way." In town, rumors twisted around the contradictions like vines around a rotting tree. Some whispered that the police were hiding something, that the body had been too badly damaged, that the truth was too horrifying to release. Others believed the discovery of the bones was staged, a cruel trick to close the case without ever finding the real killer. One night, at a diner, a waitress overheard two men arguing at the counter. "She was alive for weeks. I heard it from someone who knows the family," one said. The other shook his head, muttering, "No, they got it wrong. She died that night. Whoever buried her just wanted us to believe otherwise." The community, once united in grief, was fracturing under the weight of uncertainty. For the investigators, the contradictions created chaos in the case file. The false confession was now irrelevant, the fibers meaningless, the timeline a blur. Even the shoe, once considered their most solid piece of evidence, yielded no fingerprints, no trace of who had touched it last. Detective Harris stared at the evidence board late one night, the photographs and reports staring back like a puzzle with half the pieces missing. "Every time I think I'm holding the truth, he muttered. It slips through my hands. Lane stood beside him, arms crossed. Maybe that's the point. Maybe someone planned it that way, left just enough to confuse us. Harris turned, eyes narrowing. Or maybe we're chasing ghosts. The parents walked home from the station that week in silence, the autumn air sharp against their faces. Finally the father spoke, his voice ragged. They're never going to solve this. Not like this. His wife clutched his arm, her face pale under the streetlights. Then, what do we do? He stopped, staring down the empty street, his jaw tightening. We keep looking ourselves. If the evidence doesn't fit their theories, then we'll find the truth that does. His words were a vow, heavy and unyielding, echoing into the night. But in the station across town, the detectives sat in their chairs, staring at the contradictions, the gaps, the evidence that refused to align. And one unspoken fear hung in the stale air between them. What if the truth was never meant to fit at all? Detective Harris had been working cases for over 3 decades, but none had ever burrowed into him the way this one did. Other cases closed, some with justice, others with compromise, but this one gnawed at him, a puzzle that mocked him from the corner of every room. Even when he went home, the case followed. Her photo taped above his desk, her wide smile frozen in time. He tried to sleep, but the silence of his house only replayed the unanswered questions. Every night he returned to the evidence board, long after his colleagues had gone home. The station would be quiet, the hum of the vending machine filling the void, the smell of burnt coffee lingering in the air. Papers cluttered the table, conflicting autopsy notes, maps marked with pins, transcripts of false leads. He stared at them until his eyes blurred, until details began to shift and blur into patterns only he could see. Too shallow, he muttered to himself, tracing the site of the grave on a photograph. Too careless, not planned. He circled the fibers report again, this time reading past the contradictions. Household carpet, cheap, common. But there was something in the margins of the report that others had skimmed over, tiny shreds of blue plastic entwined with the fibers, not part of the carpet at all. He pulled the bagged evidence from storage, holding it beneath the harsh fluorescent light. The fragments glinted faintly. He pressed closer. Plastic twine, the kind used in feed bags or bundled hay. His mind raced. A basement, carpet, twine used for feed. It pointed toward someone not in the shadows of the city, but someone rural, someone ordinary. The next morning, Harris drove through the outskirts of town, past barns with peeling paint, past fields where scarecrows leaned in silence. He stopped at the old feed store, its sign faded, the gravel lot cracked with weeds. Inside, the clerk confirmed what Harris had begun to suspect. That twine? Yeah, we sell it. Farmers use it all the time. Everyone around here does. Harris exhaled slowly. The clue hadn't narrowed the suspect list. It had exploded it, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the answer lay here, hidden in the ordinary. Back at the station, Lane tried to pull him back. You're chasing ghosts, he warned. That twine could belong to anyone. You're seeing connections that aren't there. The tension between the two detectives grew. Lane began to avoid the evidence room at night, unwilling to watch Harris drown himself in scraps of paper and photographs. But Harris pressed on, fueled less by duty than by obsession. One night, the sheriff confronted him. You've been on this case too long, he said quietly. It's eating you alive. Take a step back before it swallows you. Harris stared at the sheriff, eyes bloodshot. If I step back, she stays buried, and I can't live with that. It was during one of these late-night sessions that Harris noticed something else, an old photograph, overlooked in the original file. It showed the field from a distance, days after the discovery. In the background, beyond the police tape, a man stood watching. His face was blurry, but his posture was rigid, his arms folded. Who the hell is that? Harris whispered, leaning closer. The photo had been taken by a local reporter, filed and forgotten. No one had ever asked about the stranger in the background. He tracked down the reporter, now working in another town. She dug through her archives, handing him the negatives. I don't remember him, just another bystander. But Harris felt a chill as he stared at the man's outline. Something about the stance calm, detached, as if he were not a bystander at all, but someone making sure his secret remained hidden. The next week, Harris drove the rural backroads again, retracing the boundaries of the search grid, stopping at farms, asking questions. He listened to stories of livestock stolen, of barns broken into, of strangers seen near the woods. Each story led nowhere, but together they painted a pattern of unease. At night, back at the board, he pinned the blurry photograph of the man beside the evidence bags of carpet fibers and twine. He drew lines between them, his handwriting frantic, his notes more like confessions. Lane found him one evening, hunched over the board, muttering, "You're scaring me, Harris." Lane said. "Good," Harris replied, eyes fixed on the photo. "Because whoever did this, they're still out there, and I'm closer than I've ever been." But closeness was not resolution. The deeper Harris dug, the further the case seemed to spiral. Evidence contradicted itself, suspects lied or faded into obscurity, and the girl's face on the board never changed, never aged. Still, Harris pressed on, unwilling to let go, unwilling to accept that the truth might remain hidden. He had become the one who refused to quit, the lone figure chasing a phantom through a maze of lies, hoping that somewhere, buried in the details, the ghost of a little girl would finally point him toward the person who had taken everything from her. And as he stared at the photo of the man at the crime scene, blurred but watching, one thought echoed in his mind like a curse. Sometimes, the killer doesn't run. Sometimes, he stands among us, waiting to see if anyone is brave enough to name him. The deeper Harris sank into the case, the more the fragments began to align, not perfectly, but like jagged shards of glass reflecting pieces of a whole. For months, he had pinned scraps of evidence to his board, lines drawn and redrawn, until the wall resembled not an investigation, but an obsession. Yet one night, staring at the clutter of photos and notes, something clicked. It wasn't about what the evidence revealed, it was about what it concealed. The shallow grave, the mismatched carpet fibers, the plastic twine, all of it suggested not a seasoned predator, but someone clumsy, panicked. A person unprepared for what they had done. Harris's eyes lingered on the photo of the blurred man at the edge of the crime scene. His stance was calm, but too calm as though testing whether his secret remained buried. When Harris presented his theory to Lane, the younger detective scoffed. "You're saying this wasn't some stranger passing through, not some predator who picked her at random, but someone here, someone we know." Harris's voice was steady. "Think about it. She vanished without struggle, without witnesses. That only happens if the person was familiar, someone she trusted." Lane leaned back, exhaling. "So what? A neighbor? A family friend?" Harris didn't answer, but his silence spoke volumes. The detectives revisited the timeline. Witnesses recalled seeing the girl near the swings just before dusk. No screams, no chase, no chaos. She likely walked willingly to whoever approached. That person then moved her quickly, before the search swept the area. The twine, Harris argued, pointed toward someone with access to farm supplies. The carpet fibers suggested a basement, a domestic space. She hadn't been hidden in some faraway city, she had been close, agonizingly close, until the panic to dispose of her overcame the captor. The parents were called into the station again, this time to hear the newest reconstruction. They sat stiffly, hands entwined, as Harris spoke carefully. "We believe she was taken by someone she knew. We believe she was held, most likely in a basement, before being buried in the field." The mother shook her head violently, tears streaking her face. "No, not here. Not this town. Not people we've waved to on the street." Her husband's face was pale, his jaw trembling. "You're saying someone we let near our child did this?" Harris did not flinch. "Yes." The words hollowed the room, leaving silence thick as stone. Soon, whispers spread beyond the station. The community turned inward on itself, suspicion twisting through streets and churches and grocery aisles. Neighbors avoided each other's eyes. Parents who once trusted one another now kept children inside, blinds drawn. Every knock on the door carried unease. And yet, no single suspect could be tied to the crime. The blurred man at the edge of the crime scene remained unidentified. The fibers could have come from dozens of homes. The twine was too common to narrow. The investigation was tightening its circle, but there was no one at the center. One night, Harris sat across from Lane, both men hollow-eyed from fatigue. Lane's voice broke the silence. "You know what the worst part is? We'll never really know. We'll build theories, point fingers. But at the end of the day, she'll still be gone, and the person who did it will still be walking free." Harris stared at the evidence board, at the child's face staring back from a photograph that would never age. Maybe. But maybe the truth isn't in catching them. Maybe it's in refusing to let her story disappear. Lane shook his head, bitter. "That won't bring her back." "No," Harris whispered, "but it'll make sure whoever did this can't forget what they've done." In the weeks that followed, the official file filled with contradictions, caveats, uncertainties. But Harris's private notes told a sharper, if unproven story. A trusted face had led the girl from the swings. She had been hidden nearby, likely in a basement lined with cheap carpet. The twine hinted at farm connections. Days, maybe weeks later, she was buried hastily in the field. And then, when her body was found, the guilty one had stood among the crowd, watching, waiting, daring the town to notice. The case never yielded the clean confession Harris longed for. No DNA pointed to a killer, no witness broke years of silence. But in his mind, the chilling truth had emerged. Not a faceless monster from outside, but someone woven into the fabric of the town, someone the child had trusted enough to follow into the dark. That thought lingered in every corner of the community, poisoning every gathering, every handshake. The fear that the killer still smiled among them, still waved from the porch, still lived under the same sun. And for the parents, it was a truth more unbearable than any verdict that their daughter's death was not a crime of chance, but of betrayal. Grief had no clean edges. It bled into everything. Into the quiet of the kitchen, into the silence of the streets, into the way the wind rattled the playground swings that now stood empty. For the girl's parents, the confirmation of her death did not bring closure. It brought a deeper, darker kind of emptiness. The hope they had clung to for 3 years was gone, ripped away by the discovery of shallow earth and fragments of bone. Her mother rarely left the house. Curtains stayed drawn, sunlight blocked, as though the world outside had no place in her life anymore. She moved through rooms like a ghost, lingering in her daughter's bedroom, smoothing the untouched pillow, running her hands over dolls whose eyes still glittered with innocence. Sometimes she sat in the small bed at night, rocking silently, whispering lullabies to no one. Her father, once restless with the search, grew colder, harder. He no longer stapled flyers to telephone poles or knocked on strangers' doors. Instead, he paced the house at night, muttering that the police had failed, that the truth still lay buried deeper than the grave they'd found. "Someone's out there," he said over and over, voice low, trembling with fury. "And they think they've gotten away with it." The community struggled under the weight of her death. The playground where she vanished became a shrine of flowers and candles. Children avoided the swings where she had last played, their parents pulling them close, muttering prayers under their breath. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones, suspicion lacing every word. "Could have been anyone," one woman whispered outside the grocery store. "Maybe someone we've known our whole lives. Or maybe someone still living right among us," another replied, her voice shaking. The playground, once alive with laughter, now stood hollow. The rusting slide groaned in the wind. The sandbox lay abandoned, and every creak of the swings carried an echo of the girl's laughter, a sound that would never return. Each year, on the anniversary of her disappearance, the town gathered for a vigil. Parents held their children tightly as candles flickered in trembling hands. Hymns were sung softly, breaking into sobs. The girl's mother stood at the front, clutching a photograph worn at the edges from too much touching. Her voice cracked as she spoke. She was only 7. She was supposed to grow up, to dream, to live, and all she got was taken. Her father followed, his words sharp, unyielding. "We won't forget her. We won't forgive the one who did this. And we will never stop demanding answers." The crowd murmured in agreement, but beneath their grief was fear. Because even as they mourned, no one knew who in the crowd might carry the guilt of that night. By the 3rd year after her remains were found, the vigil had become ritual. The candles glowed brighter against the dusk. hundreds of flames swaying together like a sea of sorrow. The father raised his candle high, his vow unchanged. I will not stop, not until I know. And then an unsettling moment. As the hymn faded, her mother's gaze caught on a figure standing at the far edge of the crowd, not holding a candle, not singing, just watching. He stood still, his face shadowed, arms folded across his chest, the way a man might stand not in grief, but in observation. For a moment her breath caught. The figure met her eyes, then turned, disappearing into the dark before she could speak. She grabbed her husband's arm. "Did you see him?" "Who?" But when she pointed, the space was empty, swallowed by night. The vigil ended, the candles blown out one by one, smoke curling into the air, like spirits lifting skyward. But the mother walked home shaken, the image of that silent figure etched into her mind. Because for the first time since the bones were found, she felt certain of something more terrifying than grief, that the person who had stolen her daughter had been there all along, standing among them, watching. Time passed, but the absence never dulled. The girl's name no longer appeared nightly on the news, and the flyers that once papered telephone poles had long since weathered away, the colors bled out by rain and sun. But in the hearts of her parents, and in the shadows of the town, the wound never closed. Her bedroom remained untouched, a shrine in pastel colors, a bedspread patterned with stars, stuffed animals lined neatly along the headboard, crayons still scattered in a box on the desk. Her mother dusted the room weakly, speaking softly to the toys, to the walls, to the silence. "I'm still here," she whispered, as though her daughter could hear her through the veil of time. Her father found his refuge in anger. He spoke at schools, at community meetings, at church gatherings. His words were raw, jagged. "It only takes seconds," he warned, voice trembling with restrained fury. "One distraction, one glance away, and everything you love can be gone." His grief had hardened into a mission, a demand that no parent let their guard down, that no other child vanish into the night as his daughter had. The case itself drifted into limbo. Files grew dusty. Evidence boxes stacked neatly in the archives, waiting for a breakthrough that might never come. Detectives transferred, retired, left the force, but for those who had once held the case, her face never faded. Harris, now grayer, would sometimes sit in his car near the field where her remains were found. He would stare out at the wind bending the tall grass, whispering to himself, "We failed you, but I haven't forgotten." The town carried the scar in its own way. The playground was eventually rebuilt. New slides, new swings, fresh paint, but it never drew the same crowds. Parents stood watchful at the edges, eyes flicking to every passing stranger, every unfamiliar car. The innocence of those summer evenings, the laughter ringing freely through the twilight, was gone. For years children who grew up in that town told stories of the little girl who had vanished. Some swore her ghost lingered at the swings, that if you stayed long enough after dark, you could hear the faint squeak of chains moving, even when no one sat there. Others said the ground in the field never grew grass quite the same, as though the earth itself remembered. Yet from her loss, something else emerged, a legacy forged in pain. Community programs blossomed, teaching parents about child safety, training volunteers for search and rescue. The sheriff's office changed its procedures, no longer dismissing early theories, no longer allowing the first critical hours to slip by. Across counties, her story became a lesson written into protocols, the case of the girl who vanished from a playground, and how no one had seen her leave. Her mother, though broken, spoke at vigils for other missing children. Her voice was fragile, her hands trembling, but her words carried the weight of lived terror. "Don't wait," she told parents. "Don't assume they'll come back on their own. Fight for every second, because every second matters." Her father, though still consumed by rage, stood beside her. Together, they became unwilling torchbearers for a cause they never wanted. Their daughter's memory woven into every warning, every desperate plea for vigilance. But beneath the activism, beneath the procedures and speeches, the truth remained haunting. Her killer was never named. Somewhere, perhaps across the country, perhaps just down the street, lived the person who had led a child into the dark and buried her in the earth. At night her mother sometimes dreamed of that figure, at the vigil, the one who stood at the edge of the candlelight, arms folded, watching. She would wake in a sweat, convinced it had not been a dream at all, but a glimpse of the truth hidden in plain sight. Her father's vow never faded. Even years later, gray in his hair, lines carved deep into his face, he whispered the same words at her grave. "I will never stop, not until I know." The playground still stands. The swings sway in the wind, their chains groaning softly. Children play there again, their laughter returning in cautious bursts. But to some parents, the sound is bittersweet, because layered within the echoes is the memory of another child. Her laughter, her small sneakers thudding against gravel, her voice calling out for just 5 more minutes. She became more than a case file, more than a photograph on a missing poster. She became a reminder of how fragile safety is, how quickly innocence can be stolen, how deeply a single loss can scar an entire community. Her story is not one of closure, but of shadow, a vanished child, a shattered family, a town forever marked by the silence she left behind. And as dusk falls over the playground, the creak of the swings blends with the cicadas in the trees, and those who remember feel the same chill, the sense that somewhere, the one who buried her is still listening, still still carrying the secret that turned a summer evening into a nightmare that has never ended.